feel kind of short today. It's not God speaking, it's really me here, even if you can't see me. Now, large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So, therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Well, I'm one of those people that loves to travel. And when my kids were young, we hopped in the car and we drove all over the country to see things in Washington, you know, the monuments and the museums and all over the place, to see things out west that were grand and wonderful. But as an adult, then later as an adult, I turned my interest to foreign places, and so I've gone to different places, and each place, France, Norway, and even Japan, I had to learn certain phrases that you have to know. One is, "Quel est le prix?" in France, which means, and then another one is, in Norway, "Dieu me coste det." And one in Japanese means, "Shimasuka?" And that means, "How much does it cost?" You can't do anything on a trip if you don't know how much something costs. If you go into a restaurant and don't know what the food costs and order whatever you want, you may be very surprised. Same with all the things that are found on your trip, so you have to know the cost. Today's passage is all about the cost. It's the cost not of food or things on a trip, it's the cost of discipleship. Jesus, in this section that we're reading about, is on the move again. He has left the hospitality of the banquet that we read last week and continues on the road to Jerusalem. He knows that Jerusalem is his final journey. He knows the price tag for this trip, and it's high, and it's not negotiable. Well, it almost sounds in this reading that we just read as though he is chastising the people, and he is giving them such a hard time that he's almost trying to drive them away, to get them to stop following him, perhaps. Well, I don't think that's what he's up to. I think that he's up to something else entirely. I think he's trying to show them, and us, to know exactly what is involved of being a disciple of Jesus. Before we start, we need to know what we're getting into when we say we want to follow Jesus. Because there is a cost, and the cost is really very surprising. First, he says, we must hate our families. Well, that's pretty amazing. It was pretty strong stuff in a culture back then where family was everything, and loyalty to a family was the highest loyalty expected. But the word hate in this language, if you translate it from the Greek, is a little bit different. It doesn't translate very well. So if you take a closer look, this is what Jesus means more specifically. The Greek vocabulary in Luke had really a small amount of words comparing to English. So the Greek word meseo can be translated as hate, yes. But it also means to regard less, or to love one thing less than something else. So I think that it might be possible in this that instead of saying you must hate your family, You must look at it as you must regard your family as less important than Jesus himself. And so by comparing the devotion one would normally hold for a family with the devotion needed to be a disciple, Jesus is saying, love me more than you would even love your family. As important as family is to you, love me more than whatever holds first place in your life. Whatever matters most to you, I'm calling on you to love me more. Then Jesus raises the price of discipleship even higher. Not only must we be willing to put Jesus ahead of all other priorities, Jesus challenges his followers. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. While we read this, we have to keep in mind that none of them have any idea, perhaps Jesus did, about the end result of following Jesus or Jesus' death on the cross. That wasn't even in the horizon yet. His original listeners would not have been aware, as we are, of the connection between this challenge to carry the cross, you cannot be my disciple, and the reality of Jesus being crucified. To them, taking up a cross was an expression that sort of meant the acceptance of a burden of great suffering that would possibly end in death. It was like the responsibility a soldier would accept when going into war. If following Jesus meant taking up a cross, it meant staying loyal to him through anything and everything, even if it meant suffering, and even if it meant death. Just as Jesus was speaking these words, I imagine he looked around and saw the faces of the people in front of him fall and turned very sober on these words as they started to sink in what they meant or what they could mean. He knew that many people, in fact most, would just walk away. He turned to the ones who remained. These would be his true disciples, and tried to help them understand these words that were hard for them to hear. And he did this by using parables. And so he begins with a parable. Jesus used this parable. If you were going to build a tower, wouldn't you first sit down and figure out if you could afford it? You wouldn't want to be a laughingstock, because if you failed to plan your project, and if you were, you might look very silly in the end. And then he said, and if you were a king going into battle, wouldn't you first sit down and figure out if your army was strong enough to defeat this enemy that you were going to address? And so Jesus is explaining that they should know what they and what we are getting into before becoming his follower. Well, it's too late because we are his followers, but we've read this before. There are three things about those two parables that is easy to miss if we read them quickly. First, Jesus tells us that the process of building a tower or going to a battle starts with sitting down and thoughtfully counting the cost. So he's saying, in the same way, we can't just follow him any old way, any way that it suits us. We have to thoughtfully consider our commitment to Jesus and what that is asking of us. Second, Jesus points out to the outcome. Counting the costs indicates that there is an end in mind, a goal to be reached. You don't start building a tower unless you plan to finish it and use it for a purpose. And you don't head into battle unless you think you can overcome the enemy. And you don't follow Jesus unless you want your life to be changed forever. Thirdly, and most importantly, I think Jesus says a very odd thing here. He says the cost is too high for the resources available. This must have been hard for them to grasp. He's saying that no matter what accounting system you use, no matter what assets you have, no matter what effort you put into it, when it comes to following Jesus, you don't have enough to pay the cost. What? You don't have enough to pay the cost. On your own, you don't have enough to pay the cost. He pays it for you. However, I can imagine the shock on their faces when they heard that line. Jesus isn't finished yet. His challenge is even bigger. He goes on more. He says, "Therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." Wow, that's a big thing to say, even in this day and age. Not only do we as disciples need to count the cost, but we need to realize that the cost is everything that we hold valuable. He's asking us to say goodbye to everything that we call our own and to leave behind everything that matters to us most. Wow. When Jesus says, you need to leave behind everything that matters to you, whether it's family, position, or the things you own, he means you have to leave it behind now and every day and keep leaving it behind. It's not a one-time and you're done thing. It's an ongoing way of living in Christ. A moment-by-moment surrender to giving up what we have in this world and to submitting to God's grace and mercy and love, knowing this, that God will always provide. So many times at council meetings over the years, people wonder if we can afford this or if we can afford that. And if it's something that is truly part of the gospel and something that is truly important to us as congregations, we can say these words. We can say, the Lord will provide. This is what Jesus wants. So to be a disciple of Jesus, you need to know the cost, and you will be putting Jesus first, and you will be putting everything else last. And even though you will sometimes fail at this, Jesus will help you try again and again each day as you give your all to the one that you believe in, the one who is first willing to give up everything for you. In our commitment to Jesus, every day starts anew. Every moment continues to require our commitment. And if we aren't willing to give our all, Jesus says, you can't be one of my disciples. That's astounding. This whole chapter and this whole section is astounding. It's hard to hear and it's hard to read. All the lessons that Jesus has been teaching us has been to prepare for this commitment. His teachings about hypocrisy, about not letting our fears get the best of us, about not placing a higher value on material things as opposed to spiritual wealth. It all boils down to this: go all in or go home. We need to go in or go home. We can't hold anything back if we want to be a disciple of Christ. Those are tough thoughts, aren't they? Because there is no way to sort of take up your cross, is there? There's no way to follow Jesus on your own terms or when it's convenient. We must surrender our hearts to Christ and trust that he will provide for us and he will help us make it through. But before you give up, as so many people did that were initially following Jesus, remember that this is only half the story. This is just one part of the story. Because Jesus, yes, he's asking us to give up much, but he is prepared to give up more. And in the process, he promises to give you even more than you can imagine. He promises to give you a life full of meaning and purpose and joy. He promises to give you a connection to a new family, the people of God. And most importantly, he promises to give you everlasting life. I'd like to add here that even though the cost is high, the cost of not following Jesus is even higher, though we're blinded to that in this world. There's an author I like, Dallas Willard. In his book, Spirit of Discipline, he lists the things we lose if we don't follow Jesus. with our whole heart. He writes, not being a disciple costs abiding peace. It costs a life penetrated through by love. It's a faith that sees everything in the light of God's governance for good and hopefulness that stands firm in the most discouraging circumstances. It's the power to do what is right and withstand the forces of evil. In short, it costs exactly this, that the abundance of life Jesus said he came to bring, he brings to us as we believe in him. Now, I'm not just talking about salvation here. I'm talking about discipleship. Jesus wants to do more for us than just a once and done, just something small. Jesus wants to give us an abundant life, a life that is full and complete, a life where we deepen our relationship with him as we grow in faith, and that we deepen our relationships with others as we discuss things and talk about what it is to be a true disciple. Jesus wants us to be true disciples who will give it all and then receive it all, both in this world and the next. Now, today, as we come to the table, this table, which is prepared for all who desire to follow Jesus, we don't just come out of habit. We don't just come to prove ourselves righteous. When you come to this table, come to offer yourself, body, mind, and spirit, to the one who died to save you, to the one who rose again to redeem you, and the one who will come again to claim you as his own for eternity. When you come to the table, having counted the cost, come as a true follower of Jesus Christ, ready to leave behind whatever you need to, even though you thought it was important, so that you can take up your cross and follow him. Amen.